Hello, and thank you for joining us. Welcome from me, Michael Scott, in Oxford in the UK, and from my joint convener, Sanford Jayungar in Washington, DC, to this, the 56th jointly promoted event between the Future of the Humanities Project and the Free Speech Project. The latter is sponsored by Georgetown University and the former by Georgetown University's Humanities Initiative in association with Campion Hall, Oxford, and the Las Casas Institute for Social Justice at Blackfriars Hall, Oxford. Together, the two projects consider issues concerning human dignity, rights, cultures, histories, traditions, and freedoms in a wide spectrum of educational activity, policy, expression, and aspiration. In a moment, I'll hand over to Sandy, who is the director of the Free Speech Project. He will introduce today's distinguished guests and moderate the ensuing discussion before I return to chair the question and answer session. From the start, you can type in questions to the panel by using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Please use the Q&A button, not the chat button. These questions will come to me during the session, and I will try and put them to the panel to consider. We urge you, please, to ask questions as and when they occur to you so that we don't get a bottleneck at the end. I'm looking forward again to another stimulating conversation. Over to you, Sandy.
Thank you very much, Mike. We do indeed have a distinguished panel today, a great variety of background and pursuits. I would mention John O'Connor first, who is the regent of Blackfriars Hall at Oxford and is both a man of the cloth and a highly educated scientist. He has a PhD in applied superconductivity and electron microscopy from Oxford, among other academic distinctions. We also have Jennifer Jones, who directs the Center for Science and Democracy at the Union of Concerned Scientists in the United States. She normally lives in Florida, but is today in South Carolina. Lisa Singh directs the Massive Data Institute at the McCourt School of Public Policy at Georgetown University, where I also have the privilege of working, not at the Massive Data Institute, but at the Free Speech Project. She's also affiliated with the Institute for the Study of International Migration. And lastly, we have John Drakakis, Emeritus Professor of English Studies at the University of Stirling in Scotland, and a veteran of prior discussions on this series in the past. I want to begin today by acknowledging that the elephant in the room is Donald Trump, who has suspended a great deal of funding, not only for research projects in the United States, academic research projects, but also others around the world that were funded by the National Science Foundation, NIH, and other American entities. And some of his supporters and he have said that what they are after, beside their usual waste, fraud, and abuse line, is woke science. They want to put an end to so-called woke science. So I want to ask the panelists if there is such a thing as woke science. Is there such a thing as value-free scientific research that doesn't have any sort of political connection whatsoever? I mean, I'd like to ask Lisa Singh to start us off on that point. Do you perceive what the administration means in this case, Lisa?
Well, I've heard their talking points on it, but I think the idea that science is partisan and is used as a partisan weapon is problematic, right? Because science is the basis for different forms of critical thinking. And new innovations are necessary and important for our society to grow in many different ways. So it's a really complicated thought that we need to abandon science, or we need to think of ways to stop scientific inquiry. Because when we don't engage in scientific inquiry, we're losing a really important stream of critical thinking. And I think it makes what we do as scientists very complicated, because we don't want to get into the politics of the, most of us who are in science, particularly those of us who are in computer science, like zeros and ones, right? And we like to think about things from a very clean perspective and prove what we're doing is sound research. And so this has been a real issue, and a real um, critical time for us to begin to rethink how to make science trustworthy to the public, so that they will understand that it is not partisan. It is value driven, of course, because we care about improving outcomes for people, but it doesn't have to be driven by values that we don't all have interests in maintaining.
John O'Connor, I'd like to ask for your thoughts on this issue. First of all, have the same issues come up in the United Kingdom from
Yeah,
time
I
to
mean,
time?
I think the assumption in the United Kingdom, I speak also, I'm a moral philosopher as well, so I think in those categories, is that the natural sciences don't really lend themselves to being they're not amenable, if you like, to being labelable as either woke or anti-woke or anything in that domain at all. The vast majority of the natural sciences are going to be just doing straightforward natural sciencey type of things. And then when it comes to even something like, okay, there might be topics like, I mean, a lot of the kind of issues, let's say on vaccines, would not have those controversial overtones that they might have in the United States. On issues, on a very hot topic issue, regardless of one's own political or social views, let's say on the issue of on gender, when there was a big meta study, which was the Cass report by Dr. Hilary Cass. Her job was to review the evidence and to go with what that evidence led to. So as it happened, she became fairly critical of many interventionist practices. But I mean, at least in principle, she was very much expected, mandated to come to contrary conclusions if the science drove things in that way. Now, the science can be disputed, and the interpretations of the science might be disputed, but there is a sense that there is nonetheless an expectation that it will be based on fundamentally objective, evidence-based terms. So even in those hot topic kind of issues, that at the end of the day, the sort of the bottom substrate is going to be good old-fashioned scientific kind of reasoning, which will, and if there are deficiencies in the studies, then you can go out and do new studies. But those studies again would have to be done by objective, proper scientific standards that can be criticizable and should be transparent. So it's not so. I mean, but that's those kind of hot topic issues will be a relatively small, if not a very small, part of the overall scientific engagement. So my sense would be the landscape in the United Kingdom is really seems to be quite, at least as presented to us, seems to be at least somewhat different than in the United States.
Thank you. Jennifer Jones, among the panelists with us today, I suppose somebody could say that the Union of Concerned Scientists has a political posture, or appears sometimes have a political posture. And certain people might argue that I really dislike this term woke, but we're stuck with it. Is that a fair accusation? I mean, the Union of Concerned Scientists has been around for a very long time and has done some remarkable public service in this country and around the world. But nonetheless, is this an issue you have to worry about?
I can't.
Jennifer, we're not hearing you. I don't think it's a matter of being on mute. I think it's a matter of your microphone not working. I'm going to move on and ask you to see what you can do, and Ryan Finster in the background may be able to help. So let's go to John Drakakis, who is a humanist and someone who has not dealt with overtly scientific issues, as far as I know. But what is your perspective on this set of issues, John?
Well, in a sense, the idea of wokeness is a reaction to a whole set of circumstances that began virtually 40 years ago. I mean, I think it's a kind of, curiously enough, right-wing reaction. It was the left, in Britain at any rate, I mean, I can't speak for the States, that started this whole debate about whether you could have objective knowledge or whether all knowledge was politicized, and everything that followed from that. And gradually the right has taken this over. I mean, it's interesting that it should be somebody like Donald Trump who has been furthering this kind of anti-woke agenda. But he's also furthering the idea that there is no such thing as truth. And it seems to me that this is where the humanities engages with what I think probably would be a feature of science, which is, research is specifically designed to get at truth ultimately. You can decide ultimately whether something is true or false by marshalling facts, testing those facts, etc. Now, in a sense, the humanities doesn't have too much to do with that, because you could argue that in the humanities, particularly, I mean, in my own discipline, which is English, truth and opinion are very, very close together. And trying to separate them is always a problem. There is a kind of quasi-scientific aspect, and it's mainly to do with close textual study. It's to do with the establishment of critical editions, etc., and deciding, what is a kind of a respectable text and what is not. That's as near as the humanities get to science, or science in the sense that I think John and Lisa have described it. I mean, there is digital humanities, which is much more scientific. As far as I can see, that seems to me to be a kind of bun fight. Everybody sort of fighting everybody else, but I think trying to establish itself as an area of the more general discipline. But that's my view.
Thank you, John. Let's see if Jen's microphone is working now, and go back to her. Jen? Jen, I'm sorry, we're not hearing you. I think you need to be sure that you're, maybe you can test your microphone, or maybe you need to disconnect and reconnect.
I think.
But I think the expert from the Massive Data Institute will be able to tell us what to do.
The general thing is just restart. 90% of the time that will actually solve the problem.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So I'm very eager to try to establish whether this is this comes up since Donald Trump's election to a second non-continuous term as president. But is this a universal problem? Some people have said that Brexit in the UK has done some damage to science there because of making connections to Europe and the European community more difficult. John, do you think that's true?
It's just, there's two Johns here. Yes.
I'm sorry, that you're the one I mean, John O'Connor.
It was interesting. There was a news release yesterday about, so there is this big Europe EU-wide big kind of collaboration scheme, scientific collaboration scheme called Horizon. And the United Kingdom was excluded from it for quite a period of time. And now it has been allowed to rejoin. And I think the fear was that there would be a little bit of, dare I say, prejudice against the United Kingdom against it because it had jumped ship and left the European Union. But interestingly, yesterday there was a news release from the Horizon program, those people at least, and it was the award of these very large grants of about 2.5 million euro each as part of their advanced grants for cutting edge research. And of all the countries, the United Kingdom actually got more of these awards than any other country. And in one particular case, I mean, Oxford got 7 of these. Cambridge managed to get 11 of these. And my understanding is the whole of France, if they'll excuse my mentioning this, got 23 of these. So what I'm getting at is that again, evidence here to indicate that the European Union was going to be discriminating against the United Kingdom would at least not be would not be supported by at least this particular scheme, which would have been fairly, I think, well scrutinized in terms of blind reviewing and that sort of thing. So all I can say is that the signs are looking up, even if there are going to be some difficulties. Probably the biggest difficulty is going to be around visas. The visa issue is involving an awful lot of expense with the British Home Office is both cumbersome and extremely expensive. And I think that whereas, let's say, France and Germany and all those sorts of scientists or humanities researchers coming to the United Kingdom before wouldn't have needed visas and other kind of costs. Now there are these huge hurdles to overcome. So I think that's certainly going to be something very significant.
Although, John, I wonder, initially, I recall a number of science colleagues of mine in England who really felt like it had torn some collaborations because the funding streams were not going to be the same funding streams that were there before. So it sounds like at least Horizon is one that's back in working in a way, but that's years later now. And
Yes.
so
and it also meant that that damage was done as well for those people at that particular period.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, we're at that period in the US right now where all the damage is starting and how long it can take to recover from the loss of research, the loss of grants, the loss of inquiry, the loss of teaching students how to think about research in the sciences for a 1, 2, 3, 4 year period. The implications are so large.
I mean, one of the interesting things there, Lisa, is that I mean, just to give, I mean, not getting into the rights and wrongs of this, if let's say, for example, one of the threats to the United States is seen as China, for instance, then I mean, one of the areas by which the US could keep some degree of supremacy or preeminence would be through the natural sciences. So because there are, I mean, it's generally accepted that some of the very strongest scientific powerhouses are in the United States. And these are kind of seen as crown jewels, basically.
Yeah, so I think that's also very field specific. If you look at computer science and AI, China and Russia have done quite well in those areas. And many of the students some of the top students we get are from those two nations, whereas in other areas, they don't have as much of the infrastructure that they do in those two areas. So it is interesting to think about which sciences are more superior in Western society or in the US, or have more depth. Of course, the US has depth there too, but it's not fully elite on its own, is what I mean. There are other players that are from other parts of the world that are very strong.
Let's make one more try to bring in Jennifer to the conversation. Jennifer,
Can you hear me?
Yes.
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 Okay. Thank you so much for your patience.
I want to go back to my original question to you, Jen, about whether the Union of Concerned Scientists is having, in some way, a harder time defending itself than other entities at the moment.
Not at all. Thank you for the question. So again, we're a nonprofit, right? A 501c3 nonprofit. We are nonpartisan, apolitical, but what we are is an advocacy organization. So indeed, we recognize that science, government policy, decision making is value driven. And so, we really see our main role as advocating for science. At the Center for Science and Democracy, our goal is really, especially federal science, should be independent of political influence. So if I go back to the original question around wokeness, my home state is Florida. Until a few years ago, I was a professor at a large state institution in Florida. And I'm sad to say we sort of were the original inventors of the recent anti-woke movement. And we saw our governor, Ron DeSantis, come after faculty and change policies and state laws. And ultimately, this anti-wokeness is just about obtaining power. It's about power. They get to say anything is woke that they disagree with. And the idea is really to silence voices that get in their way. And so historically, especially before COVID, this would have meant trying to silence voices, researchers, scientists doing the work that was showing the impact of oil and gas industry, showing the impact of climate change. And so sadly, we get to COVID and what we see is just a whole new escalation of disinformation. Disinformation being driven by sort of a new populist political paradigm and meets those industry goals of profiteering. And so, now just saying wokeness for anything they disagree with. In the United States, scientists and science have historically been extremely well regarded. Pew has done a study for decades that ranks different career fields and disciplines and folks. And scientists always rate really highly up there, way above certainly politicians, even certainly above folks like doctors, even lawyers. And, I think what we're seeing now is just that the sidelining of science when it becomes inconvenient.
What are you going to do about it? I'm very interested in everyone's views about how to I find myself wanting to use the word strike back, but we don't want that terminology here. I'd like everyone's views on that, including John Drakakis, who I think has had.
Well, yeah. When you say strike back, I think universities, particularly in Britain, have already sold a pass. There's been a strong emphasis on science subjects in university and in the university sector, and there has been a reduction of art subjects, particularly the languages. And I think that universities have tried to respond to what they perceive to be the changing emphases in society at large. Now, this is a long way from, the idea of research trying to get at some sort of established truth. I mean, truth is never established forever because it changes from one generation to the next. But I think that there is a problem here. I mean, we're talking at the moment, and we have been for the last 10 minutes or so, about institutionalized knowledge. I mean, I think the Horizon, correct me if I'm wrong, John, but the Horizon scheme is deliberately designed for institutions, and there was a scheme before then that did that, and Britain up until recently has been cut out from that because, of course, of its stance on Brexit. But I mean, it seems to me that to go back to the title of this conversation, which is can independent academic research survive? Well, in science, it tends to be team-led. In the humanities, it tends to be individual. And I think that I don't see any change in that, except, of course, that it will be more difficult in the humanities to get money for these things. And I think as a result, in the humanities generally, and in sort of institutionalized knowledge production generally, the move has been towards team issues, whereas again in my own discipline, the nearest you get to a team sort of issue is where you can gather a group of people together to produce new sort of editions of novels, plays, or whatever. And that's as near as you get. But every individual goes off and deals with their own particular text under the sort of watchful eye of either one or possibly two general editors. Now, I think that's a very, very different kind of situation from the kind of situation that we may find in the sciences, where everything is team-based,
Right.
even though sort of a team leader may take the credit for it. But and I think that certainly from what I've seen of the EU, and particularly in terms of the humanities, that's got a sort of science base to it in terms of its organization, where somebody puts a proposal.
I mean, if I could just
Yeah.
Go ahead, John O'Connor. Yes.
just about the humanities, because I think it's worth making a couple of points about the humanities. I mean, just two points I'd like to make. The first is when it comes to the word independent, I think one of the major concerns I would have about the humanities research is the way in which independent researchers who don't have official affiliations with universities can be very much disenfranchised. So something like, say, open access publishing, which is in itself would seem to be a very good thing, is nonetheless unwittingly, I think, disenfranchising these people because they don't have institutions which would then pay the fees to the publishers for publishing their work open access, and then they're disadvantaged because the publishers want to print only have open access material. So there are those kinds of subtle ways in which independent researchers are being disenfranchised. Then I was at something recently, a panel in Scotland, in fact, although I'm based down here, when it came to assessing projects in the humanities, broadly construed for grants as part of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. And obviously I'm bound by confidentiality. But what I would say is that just from a point of view of just observation, looking at some of the projects, some of the most interesting projects there, the ones that in a sense caught the eye, were those that were interdisciplinary. And in a sense, they were often areas that strayed into slightly kind of dangerous territory because they were doing kind of new things, and there was a sort of sense of buzz to the to the applications. And I could see how, on the one hand, these projects purely on academic grounds would be privileged because there is something kind of exciting and disciplinary about them. And yet at the same time, somebody else, let's say, with a more politicized a viewpoint could come along and say, oh, look, you're privileging projects that have a certain kind of trendiness or something about them. But in fact, my sense was that that sort of thing was not happening at all from all the conversations. But I could see how that could be misconstrued. So I just make those 2 points about the humanities.
Your point about dangerous territory. I'd like to go to Lisa and Jennifer about whether their work has been. This is actually a subtle and valuable way of looking at this question. Lisa, have you had to sort of tiptoe a little bit about
with my work? Yeah. So lots of great points there too. And I'd love to come back to the how we strike back idea later on. But at
Yes.
this point, yeah, so I do a lot of work in all areas right now that are probably somewhat not ideal. So I do work on forced displacement and migration, which I look at different types of predictive models and how we could use those during times of crisis. And so all of that type of funding around related to immigration and those things is obviously not a good spot to be. I do research in misinformation and disinformation, so I think that's something we can talk a bit more about later about the ecosystem, the information ecosystem we're in right now and how we need to be active within that information ecosystem. But again, most all of my funding related to that's federal is now gone, and then sadly, a program that I did expect it to get cut, but didn't get cut until just a week and a half prior to 12 undergraduate students from around the country planning to come to Georgetown. It was a research experience for undergrads in computer science. In computer science, we have we're not we're not diversified, and this grant was focused on increasing participation among women and other groups that are not well represented in computer science and giving them research experiences that they may not have in their home institutions. So 10 days prior to them coming, we were informed by the National Science Foundation that they were terminating my grant. I believe, and this is just my feeling based upon the new verbiage that's there about what they allow and don't allow. I believe it's because my grant had terms like gender and diversity in it. And at first I was just so sad and devastated, like, oh my gosh, how am I going to tell these 12 students a week in advance that they can't come? And then the next day I woke up and I was mad and angry. And I was like, no, they are coming. I am not ruining their summer. And I just started asking everybody for funding little by little. And we now do have that cohort of students here at Georgetown. So one way to fight back is actually to just ask, and people want to help if they can, even if it's a little bit and a little bit at a time. I think there's a real importance to getting out there, knowing some of our traditional funding is going to go away, and we have to find new ways of funding our labs. John is right. We tend to have bigger labs, and it's going to slow down the progress of research when we can't have as big a lab. But at least we should try to have as many students, as many faculty as we can. And then what we need to do is we need to collaborate even more, because our resources are tighter, to work on slightly different problems that complement researchers at other institutions, building different consortiums so we can get as much work done. I think that's vital right now at this moment so that scientific knowledge doesn't get stifled.
Well, that's a very inspiring story of salvaging something despite some developments that seemed catastrophic. Jennifer, back to you on this fighting back question, or surviving in a different way. I want to interject one remark here. During Donald Trump's first term, people said that there were certain things being harmed that would take decades to repair. And I'm not sure that has turned out to be true, whether it has or not. But please, how do you fight back?
Well, first off, I do think we need to be clear that, Trump 2.0 is not like the first time. This is so much bigger and more severe and impactful when we look at the cuts to staffing, the cuts to researching, the sheer change in policy and law. So, I think a couple things when we think about, quote, fighting back or really fighting for public science is that, in the US, first off, we recognize this is science for the public good. This is our tax dollars to fund cancer breakthroughs for our family, dollars to fund, clean water treatment research. It is money that gives us the health, safety, and dignity we want for our communities and families. And so, making it clear to our communities, to society, the value of public science, not to mention the economic value, so much data over decades showing for every dollar invested in public research and development, it's a multiplier effect, $1, $2, $3, $4 that goes on to spur private investment in the economy. So as we've seen around the country, when we've seen the collapse and dismantling of grants, especially like NIH grants, I think a lot of smaller colleges and universities also have been extremely hit. And those are universities that are the center points of their towns. And so those towns are reeling. So making it publicly understood the value of science for our economy, for our communities is one way. But also we absolutely have to push back on the policy and on the legal front. And that's a big part of what we do at the Union of Concerned Scientists is that, so many of the policies, the executive orders that Trump has put in this administration, every day we're finding out through the courts that they are indeed illegal. I think just last week we saw a judge say that the NIH needs to reinstate a lot of grants. We're involved in multiple pieces of litigation against DOJ, against the CDC and FDA for removing public data sets. Again, public, funded by the taxpayer for our own benefit and use. We do a lot of new research to guide policy making. So whether that's our teams that work on climate change, teams that work on food and agriculture, we have folks that work in the democracy space. And so using the best available data, evidence that we can also produce to fight for good policy. One of the questions that we hear about is this a war on science? And I would have said yes, probably until this current administration. During Trump 1, it was a war on science. What we're seeing now, I think, is way more dangerous. This is a war to co-opt science for a long-term direction that is not about public benefit, that is not about the public good. Again, it's about this idea of stifling any intellectualism, any voices that they disagree with by labeling it woke, by taking monies, by intimidation. The question you posed to Lisa, who I can't imagine, the private fundraising you're having to do now to bring these students. Before this administration took office, between the election period and inauguration period, the harassment campaign against public scientists began. And so this is absolutely, an intentional moment of danger against scientists who have been very purposefully intimidated, made to be fearful, whether it's fearful you're going to lose your funding or, turning the troll army against scientists and making them feel physically afraid. I'm so proud to work at the Union of Concerned Scientists. We take $0 federal dollars, which is one reason I can be here today and speak sort of my truth and the work we're doing, because we're not dependent on those federal monies. And sadly, that's where we're seeing, universities and colleges have struggled in these first few months to find their place. But let me just finish by saying, Sandy, I think that the public is really starting to come along. The No Kings marches that we saw last weekend, some are saying, it's the largest probably turnout in certainly in recent years and decades, if not history. And so I think a lot of folks are waking up to how these cuts against science and free speech are endangering themselves.
You know, there's one thing that we've all sort of said, but we haven't said, which I think is
We're
really,
going to turn in just a few moments. Go ahead.
I was just going to
Go
say,
ahead.
that we've all sort of said, but not just said directly, which is a lot of what is happening, all this chaos, all these continual different orders and different changing directions, whether it's on science or on attacks to other areas of our economy and our government. It's that people are starting to think that some people are starting to think this is normal, and we can't allow that, right? We can't allow every single one of these days to be a normalized thing. Oh, this is just Trump doing his thing. Oh my gosh, this is okay. Because it's that normalization that then takes out that fight spirit. Like every day, all of us who know what the impact is on the sciences and on institutions like higher education and on government institutions like the CDC and Department of Education. I think we have to find ways to bring to the forefront what is not normal.
A very good point. We're going to turn to Mike Scott in just a moment to address any questions that have come in. So if some of our participants have questions, it's a good time to put them in the Q&A button. But I want to turn very quickly, and this may be a hard subject to discuss quickly, but I've read and heard that in the UK, and I've asked this of John Drakakis and John O'Connor, there's sometimes some conflict between the intellectual sector, the universities, and the commercial sector about who should control research, who should set the agenda. That, of course, has been an issue in this country as well, but I don't think it stands out right at the moment the way it may in the United Kingdom. John O'Connor, is there something there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to say that startups and that kind of commercialization of research is becoming quite a big thing here. So there's down in the south of England, the top research universities tend to be huge income generators and industry generators. So there'll always be a tension there. At the same time, I do think that there are quite strong moves to protect, if you like, more research that's not obviously amenable to commercialization, but it does mean that there's going to be quite a lot of pressure, or there's going to be a lot strong kind of incentive to doing research that is going to be monetizable. So it is having an impact here. It's bound to. In the case of medical research, it's going to go where the money is. So there are going to be certain ailments that are not going to attract large funding, and that's a terrible shame. Certain ailments that are going to attract the funding. I don't have a sense that it is anything that again is particularly amenable to being considered, to use a problematic term, woke. It's more to do with just if like fairly kind of brute commercial factors rather than ideology, I would have thought, at least dominantly so. There will be always exceptions, perhaps, but
Sure. Thank you for that, John Drakakis. Do you have a very brief addition to that?
The thing about excuse me, the thing about universities is that they need to get involved in sort of commercialization and all the rest of it, but they're not commercial enterprises. And I think that we've lost the distinction between that. And it varies from university to university. I mean, for example, down at Oxford, where the university colleges there are pretty rich, they have all sorts of possibilities, which in a provincial university they don't have. And the way of funding universities has changed. there was a time when I first came into the into university teaching that there was a place called the University Grants Committee. It was given a block grant, and the block grant was then divided out around the universities. That changed, and the cuts began in the early 1980s, and of course it continued ever since. And what you have now is an administrative sector in the university that is specifically designed to generate income, and it's to generate more income than the money that that is provided by the centre. So these are very complicated issues, and I'm afraid that we're in the middle of another round of cuts. Universities are now making people redundant. They're reshaping curricula. The humanities are suffering quite considerably, I think, in this. And as you can see from the union activities in Britain, the university and college unions, demonstrations, strikes, things of this kind, these are all happening. And this is to do with, funding and the way in which, I suppose, the administration, the bureaucracy, has managed to gain control of particular universities.
Thank you, John. Mike, are you there? Maybe a good time now to turn to you to pass on some questions from our audience.
Thanks very much. Just to take that on a bit further, really, perhaps Lisa, you might just answer this one. Do you think that universities, following on from what John has just said, do you think that universities are losing their autonomy in the United States?
Did you say my name? I didn't hear.
Yes.
Yes.
Just to be sure. I think some universities are, and I think here's where we're seeing a difference in how wealthy a university is, right? So one of the wealthiest universities, like Harvard, has put enormous amounts of money towards fighting against losing autonomy and trying to stand up to some of the different losses of income, as well as the request to reduce diversity. And so there are places, Georgetown would be another one, where I think they're trying to maintain as much of their autonomy as they can. However, I do think state institutions and institutions that are smaller are much more dependent on finances that are not tuition-based and other types of finances that are necessary to run their universities. In those instances, I do think we are seeing some of the autonomy go away, and that is very scary and is really something we should be concerned about, because universities have been this independent entity and this beacon of critical thinking and intellectual thought that may be getting stifled by this secondary way of getting controlled a little bit.
Thank you. Jenny, have you got any comment on that?
That's a really scary proposition. I do think universities are really in increasingly more danger to lose autonomy. If I look again at my home state of Florida, what we see is the government trying to create a system of command and control at all levels, right? So this starts at the highest level, where you have now presidents being appointed at universities who have no expertise in higher education, presidents being appointed who are explicitly partisan, explicitly with a specific religious background that they say they're bringing to a public university, all the way down then to the middle layer of laws and policies that are meant to strip, here in Florida, curricula of various topics and issues that they might disagree with, and then all the way down to the faculty level of commanding and controlling what faculty can and can't say based on those policies, restricting funding, creating policies that would allow the governor to basically fire tenured professors at will, encouraging students to record and spy on their faculty and report them. And so when we see that, then at some of the private large institutions that Lisa was mentioning, think your Cornells, think your Harvards, what we see, happening in those cases is where the president almost unilaterally says, I don't like what's happening on your campus. In many of those cases, that was student protest. You will change your departments, you will change your policies, you will change what you're teaching, or else. And if that isn't a loss of autonomy, I don't know what else. That is absolute fear and intimidation. And again, it's about political control and power.
Well, and I think that, so I agree with you, but I do think that it's the moment for us to make a decision as academics and as institutions that were designed to educate, whether or not we're going to succumb to that loss of autonomy, right? And some cases there is state control. That's a whole different ball of wax. But in cases where there's a different board of directors and it's an independent board of directors, if they're choosing to give more control to the federal government or to other governments, or allowing them to influence their curriculum, that's something that we really have to be concerned about. And I hope that institutions that can stand up choose to fight it, even though it's expensive.
John,
There's not
Connie,
a lot of hope there when we don't even see Congress standing up for the separation of branches. So that's really worrisome. And it puts a lot of responsibility, indeed, on universities to defend themselves, when in fact those layers of defense should be in place with some, co-equal branches of government, which is essentially dissolved.
Absolutely. Congress should be the ones handling this and taking care of the situation. But in the vacuum that's there, will universities be the ones that fill that or not? It's an interesting question that we'll see.
John O'Connor, can I turn to you and ask you about Oxford University, because last year there were a number of student demonstrations in Oxford. How did the authorities on the whole, the authorities of the university and the authorities of the various colleges, how did they contain that so that there's still free speech, but for the students?
Yeah, it's
But
obviously
it's organized.
It was massively sensitive, as you can imagine. So Oxford, unlike other universities pretty much in the United Kingdom, maybe Cambridge, divided into colleges. So when it came to student bodies, and all students are members of colleges, so as well as operating in their respective departments and faculties, they also have their student common rooms. So instead of having, let's say, huge kind of bodies, you're talking about, say, for graduate students in some of the colleges, say a common room of about 400, 500 students, undergraduates, postgraduates. It was very difficult, and there was a sense in which many of the authorities in the university, and I speak in very general terms, were trying to contain things and trying not to provoke, and also trying to enter into conversations with the different parties. But there were incidents nonetheless, including the disruption of exams and the invasion of the Vice Chancellor's office. I think that, towards the end, various kind of trespass notices with the threat of legal injunctions and those kinds of instruments very much came into play. The university itself was very careful not to take sides. It was also very careful, I think, and I have to say the university was very careful on this, to to protect, all its students, Jewish students and those, say, Muslim students, for example, and others too. I think there were concerns that some of the main driving forces behind the cameras may also have been from outside the university, which was a complicating factor. I have to say, I mean, some universities have had kind of whistleblower policies, which almost kind of encouraging people to report certain kind of views expressed or whatever it might be in universities. But the University of Oxford itself has been pretty strong on resisting those kinds of moves. But I mean, part of what it has to do, therefore, is in order to protect free speech, it has to protect, let's call it left-wing speech and right-wing speech. It has to protect, both kind of conservative and liberal. And I think the kind of my sense is and it's maybe a generational thing, is that there is a fear among, let's say, certainly among let's call it a middle-aged kind of broadly kind of liberal, broadly kind of left-wing kind of group, that freedom of speech has become a sort of right-wing, associated with right-wing kind of broadly kind of politics. And that sort of scares them, I think, because but again, I think they would want to defend a paradigm in which it's evidence-based. You can disagree, but it has to be, even in the humanities, where evaluation might be, and more subjective factors would come into play. Even there has to be a sense where you're very much accountable to whatever it is you're evaluating, and you have to be, in some sense, accountable by proper academic standards. So I think on the freedom of speech thing, I think Oxford was particularly good, but I think some universities were a bit weaker on that, actually, and that kind of created other problems. I think by being explicitly fair and being seen to protect society, student groups and so on, whom they didn't particularly like themselves, let's say, was what probably stood them in good stead, because it meant that there was some protection to the university as well when they came out against other kind of voices. But it was a very delicate and it was the kind of issue that that even the slightest provocation could have made things a lot worse for a lot of people. So it was a tense time.
Thanks for that, John. John Drakakis, I mean, from the Scottish point of view, have there been demonstrations at Scottish universities in recent times?
Well, I mean, I'm out of the system and have been for a while because I'm retired, but I haven't been aware of them. And I think it depends. Stirling was always regarded as a very left-wing university. I mean, the last time there was a demonstration there was in 1972 when the Queen visited. But that was
it because she came on her own, or okay, never mind.
No. I won't go into that. But no, I think that and a lot of students in Scottish universities, of course, have their base is home. So they come into the university, get their tuition, and then go home. So you don't have that kind of sort of ferment in quite the same way. Glasgow, perhaps occasionally. I think there have been one or two problems there. Edinburgh, I don't know, but no, it's a slightly different kind of situation from the situation, say, in English universities. I mean, Scotland is a law unto itself in that respect.
How about in the US? There have been lots of demonstrations, and I understand some universities are having to go before Congress about some of the demonstrations. Lisa, have you got any views about that?
Yeah, so I do think universities have handled it quite differently, depending upon the situation. So So at Georgetown, we haven't had as many large-scale demonstrations, and any of the ones that we've had have tended not to be students. They've tended to be others who've come from from not our campus and come onto campus. But I do think this is a really important point you're making, which is when I was younger and I was in college, I knew a lot of people who had very different opinions than me, and we would just sit and debate them, and we'd have conversations. And yeah, sometimes we would, get really riled up about our conversations, but ultimately we didn't have this hate for people, or we didn't have this hate for the other thought. And I think now, because we're in this very fractured information ecosystem, people are exposed to one viewpoint in a really, really stark way, where they don't actually see the merits of the other viewpoint because they're always bombarded with a single viewpoint. So then when they go to actually have conversations with others who might have the other viewpoint, which is in itself a rare thing, but if they do go, they're not open to the ideas that their ideas might not be the best one. And maybe they are, but they're not even willing to kind of have that conversation. And so this to me is one of the most fearful parts of being at the university, when we can't be the place where different groups can come together and have those conversations. I really like the way John talked about how different houses, they had conversations in those houses. And I think at universities, we have to consider how we can pull together subgroups to talk about controversial issues in a nice way, where we can debate and disagree, vehemently disagree, but still do it and understand that we're all coming with our own perspectives. I know Georgetown did a number of meetings that were across religions during some of these controversial times. I think that was really important. So how do we get people to sit and talk who are in these different groups? If we can't do it at universities, then I really think it's going to be even worse more broadly.
I think that's a really, really important point, because the algorithms that they're looking at in terms of the social media just keep reinforcing what they want to hear. Whereas the university wants to open the debate. Jenny, have you got any ideas on that?
Yeah, this is not spontaneous, this attack on universities, the attack on faculties and free speech. This is a coordinated campaign. It's been, working for years, if not decades. But if we look at the most recent version, what we're seeing play out in the real world is literally a page from Project 2025. Right. And so the assault on higher education, on independent inquiry, has been part of the conservative plan for many years. And I think when I look at what Trump has been doing in this, basically this year, some of it is building on the success that conservatives in Congress had last year by bringing a number of university presidents before Congress, and especially getting them to testify about student protest, about anti-Semitism. And frankly, those college presidents showed up and largely failed in trying to communicate to the public a nuanced, they were overly nuanced in trying to explain how they, as college presidents, sort of balance free speech, student dignity, et cetera, et cetera. And, they showed up to what they thought would be an intellectual debate. And really what it was a conservative platform for media talking points, right? And so when you look at Congress today and you look at these kinds of hearings, they're, ultra adversarial. There's no goal there really to get to the truth. The idea is everybody gets to put in their talking points. And so, in that Congress, when the conservatives had the majority, they had good success in essentially getting a number of high-profile university presidents to leave their jobs. And I think we're now seeing the continuation of that. And so again, you're putting these presidents in a position where they're trying to safeguard students and free speech. But at the end of the day, they're also trying to safeguard that institution. And that means balancing the money, balancing the long-term fiscal sustainability. So it's a very difficult position. And then the other thing Lisa mentioned earlier too is recognizing that whether it's a public or a private university, you often have these boards these boards of directors in the background that are the ultimate decision makers. And many times they may have interests that are more aligned to Congress or the president in terms of their economic goals. And so I think we're nowhere near the end. Let me reframe that. We are at the beginning, I think, of a sustained assault on higher education, on free speech that we're going to see certainly for the remainder of this administration and for years to come. And this is about remaking science, co-opting it for explicitly partisan reasons. And I think the war of fear and intimidation, again, is in its early stages. We've seen some victories now with the courts, again, putting funding back in place. But I want to just, maybe one of my final thoughts to share here is that, you know, even with a change of administration in 3.5 years, we will feel these repercussions for decades, because when you lose thousands and thousands of scientists, public federal scientists and university professors, when, like Lisa, when you lose the opportunity to mentor that next generation of students, that will be a generational impact. So regardless of the swing of a pendulum as it goes back and forth, we're going to be mopping up this for a long time.
Goodness, that's a very sober thought, really, as we come to the end of what's been a really good debate. I was going to ask John Drakakis something and put him on the spot. John, as you probably know, is one of the world's top researchers on Shakespeare. Some people might say, John, why the hell are we teaching or researching Shakespeare in our universities? Can you give us a quick reason for that?
Not really. To be perfectly honest with you, it was something that fell into my lap when I was very young. And the more I've researched into Shakespeare in the 16th century, the more I've become interested in it. But the thing is, you become interested in it from a kind of 20th century, 21st century perspective. So, you know, you're looking at the past and you're thinking about the present. So, I mean, this idea of, you know, these sort of outdated playwrights and all the rest of it, why bother with them? Well, I think this is a problem for those people who really have no imagination. And there's nothing more I can say to it. I mean, I get this from my wife all the time, you know, why are you bothered with Shakespeare? And I'm bothered with Shakespeare because many of the issues that we confront are there. And certainly in the late 16th, early 17th century. So that's my reason. It's not a reason that will convince anybody, but to be perfectly honest with you, I don't care. I carry on doing what I do because I like it. And that's good enough for me.
Good. Any other comments about that? Should we still be teaching Shakespeare, Lisa?
Well, I think we should. Actually, when I was an undergraduate, one of my majors was English, and I was a huge Shakespeare fan. So, so I do think critical thinking comes in all different ways, and the more exposure we get to different types of critical thinking, whether it's analyzing literature or thinking about quantum physics, we need to kind of expand our brains and think critically and think about how all these different very different fields connect and come together. I will make one point, like kind of one last thought about what Jenny was saying and what John was saying. You know, I don't think this was the beginning. I think Trump won. We did really start to see the seeds of this. I don't think we saw how far it would go, but people being pulled into Congress and having to kind of defend why they were doing certain types of research, or social media companies coming in, but having, Congress not knowing what they actually were doing, or understanding what was going on in social media companies and how it was impacting millions and millions, billions of people, was quite interesting. But I think she's correct in saying that this is not a short-term battle. This isn't just a year or two battle. The repercussions are going to be large. All the data that's lost, all the data that's not being collected for different scientific projects, all of the people who aren't being mentored, all of the people who are whose labs have just been shut down, and just to get them up and running again will take quite a bit of time. So we all, as researchers, just have to work together during this time so that we can keep threads moving and connect the threads we have that are still working, so that we can continue to increase our knowledge and help the next generation understand the importance of science. Storytelling around sciences has got to increase so people understand that we're valuable members of society who work on everyday problems.
Okay, so somebody from the humanities and somebody from the sciences justifying our universities and the autonomy of our universities. I'm going to have to start to wind it up now. Sandy, do you want to say anything before I finally wind it up?
Well, Mike, thank you. I think that what we've just heard from everybody is about the joy of intellectual inquiry and the importance of it not becoming a political activity or target practice from day to day. One of the great issues in this country right now is that it's daily barrage, and it's exhausting. It's very, very difficult to figure out how to keep one's spirits up and how to choose what's most important to defend at any given moment. And that, I think, was part of the idea of this program, was to sort of rally people a little bit to understand just how significant this is and how important independent academic research is to our very humanity, whether it's scientific or anything else. So thanks to all our panelists. Sorry, Jen, that you had that trouble, but you more than made up for it in our conversation. Everyone has taken time for us, and they've done this now 56 times from Mike Scott and me, and we're very appreciative. And we're grateful to Georgetown University for not just tolerating these dialogues, but encouraging them, egging us on, and saying this is part of what's important for us all to do. So thank you to them and to everyone for this spirited discussion.
Well, thanks to you as well, Sandy. The next free speech project at the Crossroads International Dialogues event in association with the Future of the Humanities Project will be on Wednesday, July the 16th, 4 p.m. UK time, 11 a.m. EST, when we will be discussing, wait for it, whether the USA can be trusted by the rest of the world. That's on July the 16th, 4 p.m. UK, 11 a.m. AST. The next Cultural Encounters, Books That Have Made a Difference, isn't until October the 6th, when Tom Banchoff will be talking about Pope Francis's encyclical Fratelli Tutti. For today, my thanks to colleagues at Georgetown, actually to Tom Banchoff, the Vice President of Global Affairs. My thanks to those at Blackfriars, Dominic White, the Prior, and John O'Connor for being with us, but also being the Regent who's encouraged these, and Richard Finn, the Director of the Las Casas Institute. And I'd like to just make a special thanks to him because he retires at the end of this academic year, and Hugo Slim will be taking over from him. But he's been a great friend to us and a great supporter. Thanks to Dr. Nick Austin, the Master of Campion Hall, Special thanks to John McKay, but also to Ryan Finster today, and for helping out on the administration. I'm sorry, Ryan, you were into the deep end from the start, but thanks very much for sorting those things out. And also for colleagues, other colleagues at Georgetown who made the event happen. I'd like to thank those who asked questions, and for those of you who've attended today for all your support for the various series, especially, of course, to Sandy. I'm Professor Michael Scott. I'm Fellow and Senior Dean at Blackfriars Hall, Oxford. You can follow me on Facebook at Michael Kerr Scott, or on LinkedIn as Professor Michael Scott. Until next time, take care, keep safe. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Nice meeting you.